I'm Brenda Waugh. I'm a mediator and a lawyer in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia and West Virginia. I take cases throughout the state of Virginia and West Virginia and mediate matters involving all areas of the law, including family law, and that's what we're here to talk about today. A lot of times folks contact me and are interested in kind of getting a background, a bit of background information when they're considering divorce, to think about what happens after a divorce. And one of the questions everybody always seems to have is, how does the property get divided? So today we're going to focus a little bit on how the property is divided, and we're going to focus on the law in Virginia. So moving on, a couple of quick reminders in that this is an informational video. There's no attorney-client relationship here. I'm not giving you any legal advice. Also, any information I provide in this or any other video is all based on the law in Virginia or West Virginia, as I specify in the video. It is completely different in every other state, and you cannot rely on this information if you're not in Virginia on this particular video. So, question, what happens when you spend your life, or 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years acquiring property together, and you get divorced? What happens to all the property? The stuff in the house, the real estate, vehicles, bank accounts, retirement accounts, what happens to it? In Virginia, the property gets divided up equitably, which just means it gets divided fairly. In most cases, that tends to be pretty equal, but there are exceptions. But the general rule is that there's an equal distribution, and that's often fairly equal. The question is then what gets divided? And anything that is marital property will be divided. Typically, marital property includes all property that is acquired during the marriage. So something acquired prior to the marriage, not marital property. Something that's acquired by one person by an inheritance or a gift, if they can prove that it was only to that person and the other person's name was never on it, typically that's going to be considered to be marital, not marital property. Marital property, though, is that property that is the parties have acquired during the marriage that they are now using as part of their family, and that their family income went into acquiring that property. Again, separate property tends to be property brought to the marriage, property that is a gift or an inheritance. So like this camera, perhaps it belonged to an uncle who left it to the husband in a divorce. And the husband, the wife's name has never been placed on the camera. It's been in the husband's possession. It's his separate property. Same thing. Suppose the wife owned the camera prior to the marriage. Again, it's separate property when it's not acquired during the marriage and not part of what happened, what the marital assets were. So a question comes up like, what happens when a property is partly separate and partly marital? And that actually occurs somewhat frequently, the situation with a house. Suppose one partner owns the house and they get married, they move in, and they do an extensive remodel. Is that marital or separate property? And it's a complicated question. It's going to depend on the very specific facts in your case. And therefore, it's important for you to either work with an attorney or to definitely get some advice before you decide how to classify a piece of property that was partially marital and partly separate. Similarly, what happens when you mix marital and non-marital property? That also makes for a difficult situation, and that's something that you should talk with an attorney. So suppose you've got these nice little stacks of coins and that's all separate property, but you just throw it all in one big jar, and suddenly you don't know what belonged to whom. Same thing happens with a bank account. You have a bank account, you get married, and somebody puts some in, somebody else takes it out. And when it's commingled in Virginia, it's often difficult to figure out what part belongs to whom. And it's often just then classified as marital because it has been commingled. Sometimes when you can trace it and it's fairly simple, in Virginia, you can make the argument that it is not marital property. Again, this is a more of a complicated area and an area that you may want more legal advice on. And it's an area that you certainly should consider mediating with your spouse before reaching a resolution. So when you go about dividing property, how do you make it equitable? How do you make sure what one person and the other person is getting is relatively similar? The easiest way to do is to kind of value all the property, add it up, and then kind of divide the total in half. So to do that, you need to value the property. And the way you do that is you pick a date that you're going to decide what was the property worth on that date. It can be the date of separation. It can be the date of a court hearing. It can be the date of the mediation. It can be any date, but you decide on the date. If you litigate it, The court may decide the date of separation or the court date as the date of valuation. If you're negotiating or working in mediation, you work with your partner to determine what date you think is the fairest date to use, and you use that for the valuation. Then you take a list of the property. These are a few of the considerations for the valuation. If you've had a long period of separation, it can be difficult. You may want to backdate things. Of course, it's hard sometimes to get that information. So once you've got a list of property and you've got the date, then you want to figure out what was the value of the property on that date. Vehicles, you can go Google NADA and use those values. You can also use a tax assessment. You can look at your records you have on bank accounts, mutual funds, and stocks. With credit card statements, you can use your statements. With houses, most people tend to either look at appraisals, fair market value analysis, or they'll make an agreement based upon Zillow. With pensions, there's a way to get a present day value for a pension, and I often recommend that parties do that. These are the factors that the court might look at in deciding how to what might change the division of property, whether one party might end up with more on their half than the other side. And it's generally situations where one party has kind of wasted the marital estate. They tore something up, they gambled the money away, they gave the money away, or something that might be an offset. But these are other factors that the court might look at when the court is looking for division. Then that's kind of a big overview on how the court divides marital property. If you have questions about your case, please go to brendawall.com and schedule a consultation with me. There's no charge. You can schedule it online, and I can answer your questions about this. You may also want to look up other videos in the series that may answer your questions about child custody, the process of getting divorced, and what your options are about mediation and collaborative. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to meeting you soon.